Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Julie Schroeder of Fond du Lac is the Democratic candidate in the 52nd Assembly District. Julie, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you.
Could you just tell me what you consider to be your top campaign issue, please? Let's start that way.
Sure. So I'm actually a speech language pathologist in the public school system in Fond du Lac. And so my top issue for sure is adequate funding for the schools. And that's an issue that I see, on a day-to-day as well. So
how far short do you think the state is in what you would consider adequate funding of of our K-12 schools, Julie?
Yeah, so this gets into like a really complicated formula and equation for Wisconsin. We have one of the most complicated funding formulas of any of the states. So historically, especially for special education, the state funded 70% of those costs. And currently, present day, we're at 25% of special education funding being covered, reimbursed. And this has been a gradual decline over the years. So there's quite a disparity. And there was a bipartisan commission called the Blue Ribbon Commission that had recommended that the state fund between 30 and 60%. So at a minimum, we'd want to get up to that 30%. But again, there's a big disparity from what we used to be at.
School districts and local governments have for 20 years lived with caps to control property taxes since we're a high property tax state. Do you think these caps to control property taxes should be done away with, Julie?
So again, it would be really nice if Wisconsin would kind of update our funding formula and kind of get with the times of other states. This is a really complex topic that would take a really long time to explain fully. So I'm going to try to break it down a little bit so that voters really understand this issue. So basically, the way that school funding works is that we have these revenue limits or the spending limits, like you said, and this revenue limit minus the amount of money that the state pays for the state aid equals what local property taxes are. So when the state isn't paying the portion that they had committed to pay, then local property taxes go up higher. And the revenue limits are highly variable across the state, and it's been frozen since 1993. So some districts have a spending limit of $9,000 per student, and some have a limit of $19,000 per student. And it's really not based on student needs. So it's really not a good system or up-to-date system of school funding. And again, it's highly variable and just not based on that student need. And then on top of that, we've kind of taken on the role of a second school funding system with the school voucher school choice program. So in essence, we're basically paying for two funding systems here. So what I would like to really see is, again, reworking that formula if possible, and having the state contribute more of their portion to stabilize at a minimum or hopefully even relieve some of that pressure for local property taxes.
What about villages, cities, and counties? Do you think they need new revenue sources to reduce their reliance on the property tax?
Are you still pertaining specifically to the school funding?
Nope, I'm talking about cities, villages, and counties. Do they need new revenue sources so they're not so reliant on property taxes? Things like local option half-cent sales tax.
Sure. And I think that, especially in the time of COVID, nothing is really off the table. I'm a candidate that would want to talk and discuss the merits and drawbacks of every option and really look at where that puts us. And I think that, as a whole, we could certainly explore other revenue sources for sure.
Okay. You mentioned COVID. There are worries that the state tax collections are going to be not what was expected because of COVID. If we're, and I'm making up this number, if we're $1 billion short, would you, to protect funding for schools and healthcare and things like that, would you want to raise taxes and fees, or would you want some spending cuts in other areas?
Again, I think it comes down to a little bit of both where we're able. I think we really need to assess what those things are that we can cut back on, and what is essential and what we need to fund and fund accordingly, and look at alternative revenue sources. So I think, everything should be discussed, but I think that there's also going to be we need to tighten our belts and make cuts a little bit too.
Okay. I'm just curious, the Fond du Lac schools, what balance between virtual and in person has been struck in your school district?
Sure. So we are currently, families have the option. So we're on a, parents can choose either fully remote or a continuum of hybrid all the way up to like normal in person, where right now we're in the hybrid version. So
okay.
In the hybrid step, I should say. And that's just based on multiple factors, including the levels of COVID in our community as well. So this model has students divided by cohorts and divided up. So some are coming Monday, Tuesday, some are coming Thursday, Friday, and the rest are, and then the school is closed for cleaning on Wednesdays.
I understand. The governor has a decision on September 28th to extend let lapse the statewide mask edict. Any thoughts on whether that should be extended?
So I personally value clear and consistent messaging. And I think that right now the messaging, even at our local Fond du Lac County Health Officer, is that masks are effective and the spread is happening when people are gathering and not wearing masks. So I think that I'm in favor of the masks. It's disheartening to me that it's become such a polarizing, politicized issue. And I think that there's enough research out there indicating why it's valuable. And, especially because people can be asymptomatic and be spreading it for such a long time before they have it. And then especially with being back into school, everybody wants school to resume normalcy. And hopefully we can get there if people are doing the things that we need to be doing. So
we've seen the role that hospitals have played in treating COVID-19 patients. If you're in the legislature voting on the next budget, should hospitals get an even greater priority than they may have in the current budget?
So I think that, with COVID, we're really seeing what our infrastructure is. And, I think that comes down to hospitals and healthcare and childcare and education are really, big building blocks of our economy and all that. So I think that we need to make sure that we're addressing the needs of hospitals to make sure that they have the resources to handle this, and so that we're not overwhelming the system, and making sure that people have access to these healthcare needs to help limit the spread and make sure that they're getting the services that they need as well.
State Senator Chris Kappinga just introduced a bill, and it says if your business or organization has adopted the COVID-19 protocols to protect your patients, customers, or employees, you could not be sued over a COVID-19 incident. Do you think we need this law?
So I think that the intent is that businesses, there's always going to be a risk. So what I would want to see is businesses following the guidelines and recommendations at the local and state and federal levels, and making sure that they instill that, because certainly if they're doing all of that and somebody still contracts it, I don't feel like somebody should be able to sue the business for that. But if the business is being negligent or outright refusing to comply with those guidelines, I view that as a problem. I think that every person has the right to work in a reasonably safe environment, and customers should reasonably be able to assume that the business is taking appropriate precautions. So I understand the intent of that, but I would be concerned about the flip side of that.
The governor's proposed that a People's Maps Commission draw the next congressional and legislative district lines. Do you support that proposal? Because the Constitution now says the party in power in the Capitol should do that.
Yeah, so in general, I support fair maps and fair lines. It's really concerning to me that 10 years ago when my opponent first took office, that the Republicans met secretly and drew lines that were determined to be unconstitutional. Fair lines are integral to our democracy, and they're integral to ensuring that our representatives are held accountable to the people, the voters. And when the lines are not drawn fairly, that's a problem. So I'm in favor of the People's Maps Commission, and my understanding is that they want to work off of the Iowa model, which has also been proven to have fair lines. And then also with that plan, the legislature still maintains the right to approve those maps. So I'm in favor of that plan.
As the states around Wisconsin legalize marijuana, what's your position on medical and recreational?
Sure. This is an area that I would need to research a little bit more fully. But in general, first of all, for medicinal purposes, I feel that if a doctor is prescribing it, I feel like they have that judgment and that it should be allowed if prescribed. And then also I feel like recreationally, I do know that there are racial disparities that occur with marijuana in general and policing of that. So I would want to view those policies and procedures in looking at that.
Well, when you talk about policing, the nation has been focused on policing reforms for months. And in the Capitol, the governor has 9 bills, and there's a Republican senator that has 8, and the governor's forming a task force. What, if any, police reforms do you think should be enacted?
So this is a topic that it's really hard, I think, for people to talk about. And I think this is one of the biggest problems that our society faces and our elected officials is that people pass judgment before hearing out the other side, just based on the name and everything. And certainly policing has been, under the radar a lot lately. But the fact of the matter is racial disparities, are across society, from policing to education and everywhere in between. With that said, obviously there is a lot going on in the policing world, and these bills that you talked about have been on the table since I believe it was June. And it was also disheartening to me to see that, my opponent, our current representative, didn't even attend the special session for debate to hear and discuss the topics at hand. I think that there was a lot of common sense things to discuss out of that. So obviously I definitely understand the need to ensure police safety, absolutely. And I definitely value every police officer as well. And I also understand that racial disparities do exist. So this is a topic of high interest for me. And I've been kind of doing my own learning about this topic as well over the recent years. So, and then I also want to make sure that police officers have their job, have the resources that they need to do their job effectively. So, and assuring the public that, they're also held accountable in a manner that is outlined. So I think some of the bills, for example, one of them required 8 hours of de-escalation training per year. And I'm not familiar with policing. I don't know what other training that they have every year. I'm sure that there's other continuing education, but I know for me, in my degree, I need 10 hours of certification yearly. So that doesn't seem unreasonable to me. And, I know that police officers come across a wide variety of individuals and situations. And I don't know if there's anything already instilled with trauma-informed training and how to handle those situations, but I would want to make sure that that's in place. And then another one was the no-knock warrants. So again, I believe in our constitutional rights. So innocent until proven guilty, and a fair and speedy trial. So when an innocent woman is shot and killed when she's sleeping, due to a no-knock warrant and a subsequent error that was a result of that, that to me warrants, we need to sit down and discuss these issues for sure.
Last year, the governor recommended raising the gas tax to stabilize funding of highways and bridges. Could you vote to raise the gas tax?
Again, I think that every option should be on the table. To me, it intuitively makes sense that the gas tax would be for the people traveling the roads most and therefore causing the most wear on the roads. So it intuitively makes sense. But that said, I would want to, again, have a discussion regarding the merits and the drawbacks of that. And then also, if we did proceed with that, I would want to ensure that there was a designated fund from that tax to make sure that it was going towards that purpose of improving the roads and not being used for a different project.
When a local government or a school board plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses, Julie?
I think that it's always beneficial to try to keep as much money locally as possible. It helps our own economy, and it helps give that return on those public funds right back into our own local economy in our state. And really, it prevents Wisconsin work as well from being devalued. So that's helping our economy and our workforce as well.
Finally, you mentioned a couple differences with the incumbent you're trying to defeat. Any other differences you want to mention now?
Really, my opponent is very pro expansion of school choice, and I am not against school choice, but I really want taxpayers and voters to understand what that all entails. So, for example, Wisconsin in general is losing over $4 million in the whole state, and it's not just going towards the low-income students that it was intended for. So it's really huge disparities. For example, special needs scholarship program, that portion is paid by the state at a rate of $12,000 per pupil, and the state is funding public school students at $5,000. And again, so it's 25% for the public school, 90% for the private school. And then on top of that, there's kind of a double dipping. So, for example, a student might receive speech services from the district, which is taxpayer funded dollars, but then also be compensated this money from the state as well. The school might be compensated that money as well. And then there's no transparency in how that's used. Is it actually being used to help the student with special needs in the classroom to perform better? We don't know because it doesn't tell us. And there's no indication on a taxpayer statement of how much is leaving for taxpayer dollars to go to these vouchers. They only see what is going to the public schools, which is skewed because it doesn't all actually go to the public schools. So really, I'm about transparency. I feel like that's key to fiscal responsibility. And then I think the other big factor is that I will actually show up to work and discuss scenarios outside of partisan lines. So I want to address problems. I want to hear the other side, and I want to problem solve and work across those party lines to come to a solution. And really, my opponent has made a pattern of refusing to attend any special sessions. Pick a topic: the pandemic, easing burdens for people with unemployment, police reform bills. Doesn't show up to talk about them, which is really disheartening, even in an election year. I mean, if you're not feeling held accountable in an election year, that's a really big problem to me as a constituent. So, and I just want people to understand, hopefully, that I feel like we have a lot of common ground. We just need to sit and talk about it and hear the other side. So I think that those are really our main differences. Julie Schroeder of Fond du Lac is the Democratic candidate in the 52nd Assembly District. The election is November 3. Julie, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.